they almost fell off the changing table, but you caught them at the last one. They almost, slip under the bathwater, but there's this sense of like, that came too close, and that lives beside you for a moment in this scary way. For me, that was constant for a while. And it was trying to make sense of that and trying to make sense of like these deeply existential stakes of loving a person this much that I had not anticipated when I was thinking about what it would be like to be a mother, that led to me writing this book and trying to make sense of it in this way through fiction.
Welcome to Parent Footprint with Dr. Dan. I'm Dr. Dan. This show is about making the world a more loving, accepting, and compassionate place, one parent, one person, and one child at a time. The key to raising healthy and engaged kids is for us parents to seek the same in our own lives while striving to be the best versions of ourselves each day. No matter who you are or where you came from, with increased awareness, you can be purposeful about leaving a healthy footprint for your children, your family, and all those you care about while living your own life to the fullest. Today's show is The Anxious Mother with Yael Goldstein-Love. Yael is the author of the novels The Passion of Tasha Darsky, described as showing signs of brooding genius by the New York Times, and her new novel, The Possibilities. She also practices psychotherapy with a particular interest in the transition to parenthood and is working towards her doctorate in clinical psychology. Her dissertation research focuses on how mothers experience their anxiety for the unknown futures of their children. She's a graduate of Harvard University and currently attends the Wright Institute. Her fiction and nonfiction have appeared in many outlets, including Slate, the Boston Globe, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Wall Street Journal Speakeasy blog, the Atlantic Online, the Millions, the Forward, and Commentary. In another life, she was co-founder and editorial director of the literary studio Plimpton, which aims to make the digital age a golden age for literature. She lives with her 6-year-old son and a very patient cat in Berkeley, California. Yael, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I am so happy to be here and to see you.
Congrats on your latest novel. I took a deep dive and I was on the journey. And that's going to hold. I don't want to say too much because you're going to help us, dictate how much we can talk about, not to be spoilers. But let me just say, I was on the multi-dimensional journey with you and your character. And so knowing a bit about your work and your recent Slate article, which we'll be talking about, it seems that your personal and professional life have converged by no surprise or coincidence in your latest work.
Yes, I would say that is fair. Yes. I mean, this book really grew out of my own experience of becoming a mother. I had a very bad birth. My son almost died during labor. In fact, you and anyone who reads the book will know my birth intimately because that opening scene, that birth scene, is my son's birth. And so he almost died. For over an hour afterward. They could not tell me whether he was going to make it. So I lay there in the recovery room, just having no idea: am I taking a baby home or am I in the midst of a tragedy? And he was fine in the end. He had enough of a reserve of oxygen in his cord blood that he was okay. But when I took him home, into this cozy, seemingly happy, wonderful new existence, I was still stuck. Part of me was still stuck in what had come too close to happening. And it took the normal hypervigilance of new parenthood, where you're sort of, you're watching every little thing and you're making sure, because you don't know, you've never done this before, and you feel so protective. It took all of that up several notches. And so I felt like, it's like every little, I feel like in some ways, it's like this for every parent, right? It's like, you have your first kid home every time, they almost fell off the changing table, but you caught them at the last one. They almost, slip under the bathwater, but there's this sense of like that came too close, and that lives beside you for a moment in this scary way. For me, that was constant for a
Mm-hmm.
while. And it was trying to make sense of that and trying to make sense of like these deeply existential stakes of loving a person this much that I had not anticipated when I was thinking about what it would be like to be a mother, that
Mm-hmm.
that led to me writing this book and trying to make sense of it in this way through fiction.
And did it?
It
Did this process? Yes.
it really did. I mean, I'll tell you. So, I mean, those first few months, I did not know how to talk about what I was going through because I was
Mm-hmm.
aware, it's like I've been to graduate school. Like I was familiar with some diagnoses of postpartum, but I think
Right.
I thought about it in this very categorical way of like, well, this is postpartum depression, this is postpartum anxiety, and I was thinking about it as like these boxes and not sort of thinking like, no, like there's an infinite variety that postpartum suffering can take, just as there's an infinite variety that human suffering can take, and it could look any
Mm-hmm.
any which way. And
Mm-hmm.
so I did not know how to speak about my own experience of this feeling of like this bad thing had come too close and we were and somehow that was still a danger, and I'm so hyper vigilant and I'm so aware of every little thing, and I think if I had been able to speak about it I would have realized it was quite normal because I would have heard
Mm-hmm.
that other people were, but because I didn't, I sort of existed in this bubble of pain and fear that kept me
Mm-hmm.
separated from the rest of the living world. And it wasn't until I hit on the sci-fi metaphor that I use in the book of saying, okay, imagine if, at the moment of birth, the laws of physics briefly change so that not only does every possibility exist side by side, but they can actually affect each other for a brief moment, because that's what it felt like to me. It's not till I posited that and sort of playing with that that I could speak about my experience. And
Mm.
once I could do that and speak about my experience and look at my experience, I mean, I think, speaking about it to other people is very important. Speaking about it to myself was probably the most important thing,
Mm-hmm.
saying like, this is what you're going through. This is how it is for you. That I was really able to not only, you know, make some peace with it and not be suffering as much and not be isolated, but also make some real meaning and richness out of it. Like, I think it really enriched my experience of mothering in the end. And it wouldn't have been able to if I hadn't had that way that I hit on to speak about it, and
Mm.
then to write about it and write through it.
Mm-hmm. With brilliant creativity, uh, bringing in physics and so much. Again, I don't want to I don't want to say too much, but you bring in so much of the therapist side of you, the parent side of you, the traumatized parent side of you, the partner working out a difficult relationship side of you, all through the Bay Area, which we both are in and is close. So I loved all of the areas I could see in my mind's eye that you were speaking to. How long was the process of writing this novel?
It wasn't that long, actually. I mean, for a novel. I mean,
Right.
I have taken way longer to write a novel. I mean, I'll put it that
Hmm.
way. I think I started the book when my son was, well, I had the idea for the book when he was about 8 months old, and in fact, I know the exact moment I had the idea for the book. Um, and then I started writing it when he was a little over a year old. He's 6.5 now. I think that the whole book, I wrote the book in like a year, and then
Hmm.
took another year to revise it. Um,
Mm.
so all told, it took, then worked on it some with my editor. So all told, I would say it took between 2 and 3 years to
Yeah,
write the book.
that is on the
Yeah,
short side as far as the work goes. This work goes.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
yes, impressive. Going back to what you talked about with these boxes, and now you know where we are aligned with both being, you have your clinical self and then you have your regular human self. And sometimes we can totally access our clinical self, but most of the time when we're in the real world, even though we have this intellectual knowledge, we're still human beings having human experiences trying to make sense of it. And so, what resonated with me and what my experience has been over time, working with mothers postpartum and learning more and more about what we know about the experience, is these boxes don't really hold up. right? So there's, like you said, there's this postpartum depression, which in most cases, people look for very severe, obvious, non-functioning or difficult functioning signs. And it's only recent that people have been even talking about a postpartum anxiety or postpartum OCD,
Yeah.
which a lot of people experiencing some level of that, even if we're not giving it the big label.
Right.
And where I think they converge is in our regular non-postpartum world. We don't hear a lot about ruminative depression, whereas a person is depressed and they have these thoughts that ruminate and they're obsessive, but it's from a depressive process, and the thoughts are so intrusive and they're so alarming. And that is what I have come to learn, and you tell me from your own personal experience, for many mothers from normal existential experience of having a newborn person that you're now responsible from, to where it really can spin to a place that is, I guess I'll just call it clinical,
Mm-hmm.
where we can't turn it off and it really is getting in the way. So could you say a little, just, I know I said a lot there, but a
Yeah.
little bit about that continuum?
Yes, absolutely. You said a lot, but you said it beautifully. I was
Yeah.
enjoying every
Yeah.
moment of it. I mean, I think that it's exactly as you say that, I think there is no new parent, but especially mother. And I think it kind of it abates, but I think it always lasts, that
Hmm.
you're not having some ruminative thoughts about your
Hmm.
child.
Right.
Evolution kind of bakes that in, right? Like, here is this helpless little being, and the only way this little being is going to continue to persist is because we are going into that primary maternal occupation where our whole internal world is sort of reorganized around this little being, and keeping them safe, and seeing what they need and attuning to them. Um, I think there's a lot of research that shows that not always, certainly not always. I feel like you have to have that caveat with anything you're saying about the
Right.
human mind.
Right.
Not, but often when when those normal ruminative, slightly depressive, scared thoughts go to a clinical level, it's actually because the person having them thinks there's something wrong with them for having these
Mm.
thoughts.
Mm.
So there are several, there are quite a there I know of 4 studies, but they may be more, where they look at how prevalent ruminative thoughts are, and not only these ruminative thoughts about dangers to your child, but also checking behaviors in
Right.
response.
Right.
And it's like close to 100% for mothers, and like not that far for new fathers who are very involved in the care of their children. But if people know this and know that it's normal and are okay with it, it doesn't get in the way of life. It doesn't cause undue suffering. I mean, it's not fun.
Right.
It's some level of suffering, but it's not getting in the way of living. It's not getting in the way of functioning. So it's not rising to that clinical level. But if you get to a point where you're thinking like, there's something wrong with me, I'm not a good enough parent, I'm losing my mind, or I've got to stop this, I've got to control this, then you get into this cycle where it starts getting worse and worse and worse. It's getting louder and louder and louder in your head because you're not letting it in. And that's when it can sort of rise. That's when it can often rise to those clinical levels of suffering.
Hmm.
And so the
Hmm.
more we can actually speak about, exactly as you're doing, how normal this is,
Right.
the fewer people actually reach that level of clinical suffering.
And hopefully talking to your pediatrician, your general practitioner, your internist with uh, and hopefully getting this kind of response. So I think we should also talk about, not everyone across the field puts these in the existential buckets. A lot of the medical community puts this in normal, abnormal. And this is so not a binary conversation.
Yes, I could not agree more. And I think it's interesting. I think the medical community is trying so hard, or many members of the medical community, to take postpartum experiences more seriously. But because they do tend to put it in these buckets, it often you might not get the response you want. So, I mean, I had this experience when I went to my first postpartum checkup, my 6-week checkup, and I was having a really hard time. And I came and sort of said, like, on the way here, I was having such a hard time with my anxiety that I actually imagined swerving into traffic. Like, that's a
Hmm.
pretty big thing to say. And
Yeah.
the response was, have you considered going on an SSRI? Which it's not a bad response. Like I had considered going on an SSRI, and maybe
Right.
that was right. But what I would have wanted in that moment, I mean, imagine
Right.
if instead the response had been like, I am so sorry. That sounds horrible. Tell me more about that.
Right.
That would
Right.
have made me curious about my own experience, and it would have helped me so much more. And I think that, for anyone going through any form of postpartum suffering, which I think is always baked in, even to the most wonderful postpartum experience, is to keep trying to find those people who will be curious about your experience and ask you to speak more about your very particular experience, because I think that's what we need in that time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Hear that, everyone? So just for anyone going through this or anyone it really is, and your message, and particularly in your Slate article too, is like we need to normalize this. We need to be talking about this. We need to normalize this. We do not want to repeat the stigma that has gone on with mothers. And again, it is more mothers than fathers. This does happen to dads too, but mothers are in the prime biological and experiential realm to experience this. And as you point out, it's almost this twisted riddle that we get as parents, and particularly as a mother, which is your job is to keep this little human alive, and you are completely powerless to do so with all that can happen in the universe.
Yup. That is, and like, just to, like, to put the screws to that riddle a little more, that also added into that is this sort of cultural message that, and you better not be too anxious about it, because if you're too
Hmm.
worried a mother, you're also messing up your kid. And so it's like, yeah, you're put in this impossible position. Um, and and I think we just don't think about that much. We don't think about that gap between the primal, it's really this, like, primal urge to protect your child, Like, it's as like it's as primary as, like, wanting to drink when you're thirsty or eat when you're hungry, is like, I need to keep this person safe. You feel it in that way. And you are a human who is not
Hmm.
omnipotent, and this
Right.
person is subject to chance, as we all are. And that gap is really a doozy to exist in.
Oh yeah.
And I think we don't give it the weight that it is due, and so we kind of hang parents, and mothers in particular, out to dry in this way.
Which is not helpful.
It is not helpful.
No. No. And your research, well, you said one of the most common things you're finding in your research thus far is the mothers are worrying about their worry.
Yep.
Right. So it's they're having what we call metacognition, right? We're having the separation from here is my thought, and now I can look at my thought. Right. So these are aware people,
Yep.
and that they're not saying I'm worrying about my child's I'm sure they are, but not breathing. I'm worried about my child getting kidnapped. I'm worrying about my child hitting their head. Like those are all there. But really it's like I'm worried that I'm worrying so much. What's wrong with me?
Exactly. Exactly. And that was, like, almost, I mean, all of those other themes also, of course, are coming out,
Yes.
in these interviews, as I was speaking to these women. But that worry about their worry, like, am I messing up? Am I a bad mother because I'm worrying too much or worrying in the wrong way? That was so at the surface for every mother, and it was causing so much more suffering.
Mhm.
And that was just fascinating to me, of, like,
Mhm.
this, because this is like, okay, the other worries, the worry about, can I keep this person safe? Can I keep them from, like, experiencing terrible pain in their life? No, you cannot. And you're just going to
Mhm.
have to live with that. But the worrying about our worrying, that we can actually do something about.
Right.
If we can normalize this, if we can talk about it, if we can have mothers regard themselves with respect and curiosity, instead of this, like, knee jerk contempt that I think our culture tends to bring to worried mothers, then that is a form of suffering we can relieve. And that
Mhm.
felt very hopeful to me, actually.
Mhm. So I was just formulating a question, which I'm going to ask, but then I'm catching myself because I'm landing in this murkiness of not wanting to um, reinforce a false notion. And so here was the question: is, when we think of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, most of the time, the person that has these very unwanted and intrusive thoughts knows that they're irrational, but they're too scary to not act on the obsession or the compulsion to see if it would actually happen. So what I was going to say is, when it comes to postpartum anxiety, do these mothers know that it's irrational? But as I was saying that, there's so much rationality in this fear.
That is exact. I mean, I think that is exactly it. And I think, and I think that's what really differentiates postpartum OCD, which has been skyrocketing as a diagnosis, from non postpartum OCD. I think, like, when you've had when you already have an existing OCD condition and then you have postpartum OCD, that might be a different story. But for people who are experiencing it for the first time, I think often it's not really OCD, or like it's not that it's not really OCD. I think it can become OCD, but only if you think it's irrational, because it is rational. It's like there's nothing irrational about it, except for when you start to like treat it as a huge problem and you start to try to control it and over control it. Does that make sense? So it's like,
yes.
If you're thinking like you're waking up several times a night with your like 2-week-old baby, afraid they're not breathing,
right.
That's normal.
Yeah.
It's not fun. It's going to
Right.
go away. You're going to trust that your child sleeps, through the night. But it's totally normal. It's your mind reorganizing itself, as it's supposed to at this moment, and being hypervigilant as it's supposed to at this moment. And it's only if you start thinking like, there is something wrong with me. I am broken. I'm not going to be a good mother. I'm going to mess this up. I must control this. I must control this. I must control this. That it starts becoming actual OCD at that point.
Oh, I have so many memories of when our kids were all infants, that when we would wake up, we would just go check on them to make sure they're breathing, right? It's just kind of like, let's just go make sure they're still alive, right? I mean, it wasn't a light thing. You're like walking in going, please be breathing, please be breathing.
Yes.
And then at some point over time, they get big enough, you realize they're breathing. And this was before we could look at them on our phones. Like, people can't, like, you can actually see them breathing when you look at your phone. We just had the audio, right? We're listening to their voices or their coos. But yeah, so at some point, I guess, so here's the question. So I hear you and agree with you about accepting. And I know you have a way that, which we'll talk about, a way that you have come to accept this, what's the word? This maternal, experience, right? That's just the reality of the maternal experience. When is it also you accept it, but when is it, do you think I always say, like, a problem's not a problem unless it's a problem. When is it, and to me, this problem can be twofold. One is it's a problem because it's really affecting mother's mental health. And secondly, the byproduct is over time, it does have impacts on a child because we parent a certain way when we are anxious. And as our kids get older, they give us good feedback about that. But when they're younger, they can't. So it's like, when do you find, okay, I actually need to get some professional help about this, which is different than there's something really wrong with me, I'm broken?
Yes. I mean, I think if you're suffering, you should talk to someone, because you're probably not broken, but you still might have, but you also probably are a little bit broken, because becoming a new parent breaks us a little bit. I mean, it really is this normal existential crisis where the person you used to be doesn't entirely exist anymore, and now you have to figure out, who are you now? And there's this wonderful phrase, I might butcher it a little, but the psychoanalyst Galit Atlas, who practices in New York. Do you know her?
She was on the show. Her book, was amazing. Yes, she was.
I adore her.
She's amazing. Yes,
she is. But so she has this. She talks about the normal existential breakdown of new motherhood, and she says it's a period when you either have to have breakthrough or breakdown. And I think that that's really it. You might become, if you can navigate this period with support, with help, with curiosity, in a way that you can grow. You grow, you become this new, more, this new, more flexible person. There are all these things you learn about yourself, your
Mm-hmm.
own history, your own mind. Um, but if you're suffering a lot in that process, you need to bring someone else in to help you learn
Mm-hmm.
how to have that existential breakthrough instead of
Mm-hmm.
breakdown. I would also say that especially as your kids get older, I have found in terms of when maternal worry becomes not just like this is normal and instead like this is a problem, is if you're taking your worry as fact. You know what I mean? Like, I think that
Mm-hmm.
there are some ways that you can start taking this attitude toward your worry for your children, where you regard it as a fact, and then it controls you and it controls your children. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
problem. That's no good.
Mm-hmm.
But if you
Mm-hmm.
can instead sort of always take that step back from it, and regard it with curiosity and say, like, well, why am I? Why is this a recurring theme in my worry? Why am I constantly having this fantasy about, just to pull one out that came up often in my research? It's a very common fantasy for mothers of school age children to imagine their children being hit by a car on the way to school. Or to, like, as they drive away from them, something happens to the car, that, like, in that
Right.
moment of separation, you have these dark fantasies of something happening to your child. And to sort of step back and be like, well, why am I having this recurring fantasy? Is it because there's something unsafe that I have to change? Or is it instead something about me, something about my relationship with this particular child, something about this particular moment in time for me? And is there something useful here I can learn that could actually change my relationship to myself or my child, or something in our environment in a productive way?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that was nicely broken out. And again, this is all about this show and these conversations are all about increasing, for us all to increase awareness. And what you're talking about is increasing self awareness, right? Really looking at a situation and trying to pull apart the different ingredients to see if you can put them in different boxes. And if you can, great. And if it's hard, which is normal, then seek some counsel, seek some guidance, and know that you're not alone. This is a very common human, particularly new mother experience.
Yeah.
Well, and the mothering experience, and I'll add in the fathering, the parenting experience. I mean, my experience, the worries do not end. They just change, right? As your kids get older, you're just worrying about different things. And I, I just I just have so much empathy for parents and this journey that I feel like the parents that are, when you're really trying to be a good parent, you're trying to be a present parent, you're trying to be an aware parent. You are generally more aware of lots of different things that are going on in your kid's life and things that are in the world that can be impacting your kid's life. And it is really hard not to worry, or let me just say, to manage worry. Because not worrying is that's not even something to aspire to, right?
So true. So true.
In your novel, speaking of facts, is this a fact or is this not a fact? That is what is one of the dances that is going on, right? What is true and what is not true, and sometimes what seems to be true is not, and sometimes what seems to be not true is true, right? And it's just like it
Yes.
really makes us have to think. I mean, in reading the story, it is a thinking story. Like it is a thinking story, but also helps us reflect on our own life about what are the things that we're actually worrying about, and do I have any control over this? Can I do something about this? Or do I just need to let this go and let life play out?
Yes. That was actually the other thing when you were asking about what, themes that have emerged in my research with mothers about how they deal with the uncertain futures of their children. Something so interesting that emerged was that I found that the participants who came in saying, like, I'm a worried mess, I'm a disaster, they were not. They were
Mm,
very aware of their worry. I mean, this could not speak to your theme of your podcast
yes.
more.
All right.
They were
Right.
they're very aware of their worry, And because they were very aware of their worry, they were thinking, they were feeling their way through it, and they would speak to such richness that they had actually found in the worry. I mean, they would say these beautiful things, like, one of them spoke about feeling the abundance of the world more through her anxiety for her children. Another one spoke about that. Actually, two people used this phrase, the shadow side, that the
Mm.
shadow side of worry was this richness because they could feel the sort of the fragility and how it could all be ripped away. And that made them enjoy every moment. So they were really experiencing in multiple different ways richness and meaning from their worry. The mothers who came in saying, I'm not sure why I responded to this. I'm not really a very worried mother. I manage my worry very well. I have these tools and techniques for managing my worry. They were suffering a lot more,
Mm.
actually. They were,
Mm.
these really dark themes would sort of unexpectedly emerge in their interviews. And they'd say, I don't know where this comes from, but I often have this image of, like, insert some terrifying thing. Um, and then go right back to, but then I stop it, but then I don't worry about it. And they would also, a theme that emerged in those interviews was they all had some fantasy of escape to a safe haven. And these themes of richness and meaning didn't emerge as often in those interviews. And I think that really reinforced for me, just how important it is to sort of, it's like, this is a given. This is going to happen. Figure out what this means for you. Sit side by side with it.
Hmm.
Figure out what the meaning is going to be of this new presence in your life. And it can be a rich and meaningful one if you do.
Hmm. That's so interesting about the again, this paradox of the people who are talking about being a disaster actually aren't, and the people who are using their coping mechanisms to say they're fine often aren't. Right? It's
Yeah.
like it's this opposite, and it goes to what we know a lot about the psychology of psychology of acceptance, um, or of the Buddhist tradition of acceptance. We know, or Carl Rogers back in the day, like when we lean into reality, it often allows us to befriend and create a different relationship, whatever the distress is. When we suppress, try to control, it makes it worse. And the irony here is the natural human response when one is anxious and feeling out of control is to control more. That's just like that's our normal human instinct.
Yup. Yup. And it can really get in our way.
Mhm.
I mean, that, in the book, I often think, the book, it's funny, I'd seen someone describe the book somewhere as like, oh, it's like intrusive. It's like those intrusive postpartum thoughts made into a novel. And I was like, yeah, that is in fact what it is. And without giving any spoilers away, I do think that the book for me is about how do you surrender? Instead of
Yes.
trying to control, how do you surrender to reality? And once you can sort of surrender to reality, then you're along for the ride and you can enjoy
Mhm.
it. But that
Mhm.
moment of surrender is so difficult, and we have to do it again and again and again.
Yes, and you wrote so this line I pulled out from the article, which speaks to this. When I let myself be terrified, although it can make me miserable and surely sometimes smothering, I enjoy being a mother so much more.
Yeah, it is
So
so true.
yeah, so talk about this existential experience of allowing yourself to be fearful, terrified, worried, which enhances your mothering experience as opposed to
Yeah.
taking away from it.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think it's the bringing in the curiosity and the lack of judgment and not taking the worry as fact. But instead of, there'll be these moments where I'm going into some, extreme, some thought spiral about my son, some suffering I think he might have to go through that I can't control. Um, and instead of saying like, "Oh, be quiet, Yael, you're being a worried Jewish mother," which is all that's the voice that my contempt takes in my mind. It's
Right.
like, "You're such a worried Jewish mother," you're gonna,
Yes.
which I think
Yes.
is why the word smothering probably got into that
Yes.
sentence there.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Um, and and instead of doing that, just sort of take a step back, and be like, no, you are terrified about this. You're terrified about this. Let's think about why. Why are you terrified about this? And what might you learn about yourself here? What might you learn about your relationship with your son here? How might this be manifesting itself in your relationship with your son in ways that you're not aware of? And that, it makes, first of all, it makes mothering for me so much more freeing. I can just sort of feel into it, move into it. I'm not trying to control where my mind is going. Um, and it makes it so much more interesting. It's like, here's this wonderful intellectual puzzle. What's going on here between us? What am I
Mhm.
acting out? What is it having to do with what he might be going through? There's so much fodder there for
Mhm.
thought, for feeling. And so I think it makes mothering really fun for me when I am
Mhm.
not trying to control my worry, or not trying to like corral, I should say, my worry
Right.
in that way.
Right. Right. And again, these things are not black and white, right? I'm fine, I'm not fine. I'm worried, I'm not worried. I'm terrified, I'm not terrified. There's an element of all of this in every daily situation, no matter how old our kids get, which my mother reminds me of as well. And I have that same experience with our young adult kids as well, right? Like I'm living it. I know. And I think we need to have compassion for this human experience. And again, this paradox of we are biologically driven to keep them safe and alive. And there is so much we have no control over when it comes to their safety. I'm going to quote you one more time here because I love this. Loving my son is terrifying because I have never known such joy and plenitude. And I know this joy and plenitude because I live on a knife edge of fear. I found my way to this realization and the steadiness it brings to my sense of myself as a mother when I stopped trying to separate the wonder and the terror. I learned instead to accept them for what they are, inevitable and inextricable.
Yeah.
You should be a writer. That was beautiful.
Thank you. I'll try.
Yeah, yes. So it's part of the package, right? So instead of pathologizing, stigmatizing worry, fear, obsessiveness,
Yeah.
while acknowledging it can get to clinical levels that require help, we need to understand it's part of the package of motherhood, of parenthood. It comes with it.
It's been really interesting to me, being out with this book, talking to a lot of people about this book, that a question I've gotten several times, is, aren't you worried? There've been a lot of books about motherhood, the experience of motherhood lately. Aren't you worried that the market might be saturated? And I find this to be such a funny and slightly disturbing question, because it's,
Mhm.
and it goes back to that thing we were talking about the boxes and the categories again, is they're like, well, like as though there's some answer of like, this is what the maternal experience is like. This is what the postpartum experience is like. When in fact, like, this is parenting a child is first and foremost a relationship. And like any deep, wild relationship, which is what this is, it is going to be infinitely varied. Not only with each parent, but each child to each parent is going to be a different kind of relationship. And I think that the more that's sort of also part of sort of honoring and having compassion for our experiences. Nobody has had this particular experience before. No one has been this particular parent parenting this particular child before. So it's a brand new field. And there's
Right.
no particularly normal way to do it.
That is a fascinating question. It just so speaks to our capitalistic and commercialistic culture when the response is, are you worried that the market is saturated? There can be 10 million books on a subject, and the 10 millionth and one book can still be very impactful. And again, this is the difference between our business. I'm going off here on the like an artist creating a piece of work or music or book versus the commercial aspects of selling and the market share. They are completely different things.
Yeah, I mean, they could not be more different. And the other part of it I find so funny is that I try to imagine in those moments someone asking that question about like a book about romantic love. Like, aren't you worried there are too many books about romantic love? Isn't the market saturated? It's like nobody would say that because
Right.
we know that each of those relationships is unique and different from the others, but we don't think about parenting for some reason in those terms. We think there's some normal way to do it. There's some way it's supposed to be. And I think that that can add to what makes it hard to be a parent.
Hmm. Yes. Okay. So there have been several important messages here. What would you say is like what you really want people to get from possibilities, but also really your work on it's all of it. It's all wrapped up in one. You know, what you wrote about in Slate, your clinical work and research. What are you wanting people to understand and take away?
I would say, can I say two things?
Oh, you of course. Yes.
Because I think that there are two, the book really is, it's taking this sci-fi metaphor, making the sci-fi thriller, tweaking the laws of reality in order to bring to light an aspect of the psychological experience that I think otherwise does not often come to light. And I think there are two pieces to that I wanted to bring to light. One is, what you have actually already stated so beautifully is that gap, that existential gap that we all carry as parents between what we so desperately want to do, protect these children, and what we can do as human beings, subject to chance and uncertainty, and how hard it is to live with that, and how we each have to make our own peace with it and find our own relationship to that really deeply heavy experience. That's the first thing. The other thing is that becoming a new parent in general is such a it stirs up all the psychic sediment. And I'm sure, this is, I'm sure you could speak to this, far better than I can, but it stirs up so much psychological sediment and it puts the thumbs to all our pain points as a human being that we have been
Hmm.
able to sort of skate over because, as long as we've been functioning pretty well, like we don't notice those things. And suddenly
Hmm.
we do because we're like, why did I say that? Why did I do that? Why did I have that reaction to my child? And I think that the more we can react to that with curiosity, which, is in a way what the entire book is about, is sort of going deep into these worlds within ourselves and seeing like,
Hmm.
what are the parts of myself I haven't been aware of? And how can that help me enjoy this experience more, live it more richly, and parent more effectively? I would say those
Hmm.
are the two things.
Ah, I like that. Back to like leaning in, getting curious, and not to do again the normal human response when there is pain is to pull away, right? Whether it's we're touching a stove or it's psychological pain, it's to pull away, it's to avoid, it's to reject, it's to distract. And really, what you are saying is you're inviting people, mothers, particularly new mothers, to lean into it and be curious about
Yes,
it.
exactly. Exactly.
As we wind down, I'm curious as to what your son has taught you.
Ooh, so much.
Hmm.
I mean, in some ways, I feel like he has taught me to be a human being, if that makes sense. I feel like watching him, um, at every stage, I see like, oh, this is what we're like. This is who we are. This is what humans are. You know what I? It's like, I mean, starting with like when he was an infant. I remember I had this extremely strange thought when he was a newborn of, oh, he's very needy. And then I was like, well, that's a very strange thought to have about a newborn baby. Like that requires some explanation. And it really helped me see like, oh, I am not so comfortable with my needs and with my dependency needs in particular. So it's like starting right from the get-go, saying like,
Hmm.
oh, this is something humans are like. Humans are like this, and then even just seeing, when he was a toddler and even as a preschooler, um, and honestly, even now at 6.5, it's like you see the immensity of these emotions, the rage, the aggression, all these things that we sort of try to deny in ourselves. You sort of see it writ large, and you see how normal it is and how hard it is to be a person. Like I remember the other. This was maybe last year. He was talking to me about friendships and how hard friendships are, and he said, they want things that are different from what I want. And I don't like that. And I was like, yeah, that is welcome to being human, but it's just like it's just like, it's so, they
Right.
don't have all their defenses in place. And so you just see it so plainly and honestly. And I feel like
Hmm.
every day there's something where I'm like, oh, that's what it's like to be a human. I'm like that too. That's what it's
Hmm.
like. It just every day is like that somehow.
Hmm. And they are our mirrors. Boy, like you said, all the things that we think we've put away or didn't even know we had, all of a sudden they have this way of bringing them to the surface. And that's where we need to get curious, right? And it takes a lot to be a parent, just getting through your day to day life. And then also to go through a process of inquiry and questioning. And so, for everyone out there, we empathize and try to do it in those few moments, those moments, whether it's before bed, whether it's that the sanctuary of the bathroom, which I know many parents just find that becomes the only place, especially when their kids are young, that you can be alone sometimes, and just try to have some self compassion and some inquisitiveness about this lesson, this journey that you're on with your child, because my experience has been at this point, I don't know who's taught who more, whether we have learned more from our kids or they have learned more for us. It's probably a pretty even thing. And I expect the tables to turn the older and older they get.
That
Yeah.
sounds right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I expect the same.
Yes. Okay, Yael, it's time for the parent footprint moment question. Here we go. Tell us about a time that you became aware of yourself as an individual, a parent, or even an awareness of your own parents, and that new awareness had a positive impact on your life, your child, and or those you love.
Yeah, it's funny. I think I have to plagiarize myself a little bit. Like I gave a teaser to this answer
Yes,
in my
you're
previous
allowed to
answer.
do that. Yes.
um, because it really was. I mean, it was that moment of I would say one of the most profound moments of awareness I've had in my life came from that moment of thinking about my newborn. He's so needy, and wondering, why did I just have such a strange thought about my newborn son? And it was like that broke something wide open in me. Thinking about that, thinking about the extent to which I am uncomfortable with my needs, I'm uncomfortable with my dependency, my like normal human dependency needs as a person, and this is why I'm having a hard time. Part of why I'm having a hard time as a new mother, I'm not asking for the help I need because I'm not even allowing myself to be aware of it. That was profound for me, and it really started. It started me on my own most recent going back going back years now round of psychotherapy where I
Hmm.
I'm trying to look at what gets in the way of my doing
Right.
this. Why? It's not
Hmm.
so simple as saying like I do this, now I will not do this. No, every step of the way I'm getting in my own way. I
Yeah.
continue to 6.5 years on, I get better and better at it. But it's it was 38 years of learning that I have to unlearn and figure out. And that for me um, has been the most, I would say, most profound part of my own self-awareness in becoming a mother, and the ways that I've changed most profoundly.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And the courage to change, right? The courage to inquire, the courage to seek help, and the courage to change. Yeah.
It is hard.
Yeah. Well, you should also be a psychotherapist. Oh man, all these talents that are just coming out here today. Um, okay, tell everyone. I mean, this book is just out. Tell everyone where not only to find your book, but you're doing lots of speaking and promotions. Tell us everything.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. So you can find it anywhere books are sold. I of course always encourage people to go to your local bookstore first or bookshop.org, but Amazon is fine too if need be. Um, uh, and let's see, I have an event coming up in the Bay Area this Saturday, August 19th, at 4 p.m. at the Berkeley Public Library North Branch. I'm in conversation with the novelist Vanessa Hua, who is also a columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle for many years. I also have an event coming up in the Bay Area on September 16th to benefit Page Street and Lit Camp. That's in San Francisco. I think also at 4 p.m. No, it might be earlier. You know what? Go to my website is
That's the place to go.
www.myname.com, and then all my events are listed there. And I will not be messing up the times as I am here.
That's why we need websites and
Yes.
people to put those things in for us so we don't have to think about that sort of thing.
Exactly.
Yes. Well, congratulations again. This is so much of you is in this work, and it's so clear how passionate and mission-driven you are about this topic, not only in your research and in your literature and your speaking. So thank you for putting this out there for everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for speaking to me. This was such a pleasure.
Thanks for listening, everyone. I know you know many people who would benefit from this conversation. Please let them in on it. Thank you for being a part of our community. We welcome all of your friends and family and loved ones to our community. We have an amazing community. We appreciate your 5-star reviews. They really do make a difference. You know what I'm going to ask you to do. Try to be that person you want your child to become, and ask yourself that guiding question: what footprint do you want to leave? This has been a Peters and Rossi production. Parent Footprint with Dr. Dan is produced by Laura Rossi. Our engineer is Phil Rossi. Theme music is Strummer Man, composed and performed by Pro Tunes. Artwork is by Garrett Ross. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Parent Footprint Podcast, and on Twitter at Dr. Dan Peters. For more information, go to exactlyrightmedia.com.